Guys, moving on. So the next one hour and a half hours, we would be discussing a little bit about Scrum. What we'll be looking at is what is the difference between the defined and an empirical approach. So the defined is what we call the traditional waterfall approach, and the empirical process is what we call the agile or the Scrum approach. Which approach is better? And this course or workshop will also help you understand the values and principles behind Agile and Scrum and how they help an organization reduce time to market. We'll do a little bit about the exact Scrum framework and how it can be used. And we'll also look at something called a time blocking method. So time blocking is one of the most important aspects of Scrum. Each of your event in Scrum is supposed to be time blocked. So we'll look at the time blocking method used by Elon Musk to manage time effectively. So moving on, let's look at what is Agile. I mean, at the end, all of these methodologies, whether we talk of Scrum, Kanban, they originate from Agile. So what is Agile? Now, Agile is not a framework, standard, or a methodology. It is not as same as Scrum, and it is not limited to software development projects. It is not governed by one certification, qualification, or an institute. Agile is a set of guiding values and principles, which is applicable beyond software development. And it is brought to life via frameworks, standards, and methodologies, and processes such as Scrum. It's more prescriptive and than a prescription. So Agile's core values and principles are defined in an Agile manifesto. So you guys are encouraged to go and have a look at it. It's agilemanifesto.org, where the values and the principles are all defined. So it's a good exercise, good thing to know, because at the end, most of our IT companies these days have embraced Agile in some manner or the other. To know about Agile is a good thing. So go ahead and have a look at Agile Manifesto, which is available at agilemanifesto.org. So before we start everything, what I want you to do is why don't you create a summary of what a successful project would look like in your case. So if you were given a project, what are the steps you would follow, from requirement to development to the final delivery and maintenance? So what are the steps that you would probably follow? And go ahead and put those steps in the chat window. I'll give you 3 minutes for this exercise, and your time starts now. So what I need you to do is create the steps that are required for doing a successful project. If you were asked to do a project, what are the steps you would probably follow?
You mean from the inception of the project to like completion, right?
Yes, yes. Could you speak a little louder? I barely able to hear you.
I'm saying from the inception of the project to completion of the project,
yes.
right?
Yes,
okay.
Yes. Yeah. So
I just got something started. So
no, I understand, Parul. I mean, you seem to have literally hit it on the head, the nail on the head. Yeah. And others, I would still like to see what you guys have had in your mind. So I think most of you are done. If you're done, I just wanted to ask Elroy a question. Elroy, you said design, development, testing, deploy, and then iterate. What do you mean by that?
I mean, like, you know, if once you start the process, you kind of break it down into smaller segments, and then first you target the first one, and then you kind of go through this whole process of.
Yeah. So got that. Okay. So so most of you went through something similar. So what I'm showing on my screen right now, that's what you would probably be looking at. We go from requirements to design to implementation to verification, and finally, once we have the rollout, we move to the maintenance phase. That's how everything would look like, right? Now, that's what we would traditionally do. That's what the traditional development model looks like. And that's what we call the defined or the waterfall method. So basically, what we're saying is we have the requirements, we have the funding, we have the time plotted out, okay, 12 months. And once we have success, management is very happy, and yeah, great job, management says good work done. That's something called our traditional success definition, which works on based on the scope, based on the time, and based on budget. So three things that we're looking at is scope, time, and budget. And that basically defines a traditional success, how a traditional project would be a success. So traditional value definitions is all about the great ideas that we speculate and about the new project requirements that we have. And we predict these things will be valuable. So when we have a requirement, we are trying to predict what are the valuable things in that project, right? However, what has been found is, this is a chaos report, that our predictions are normally lousy. What we predict today as being valuable for our project are not valuable at all, and they are more of a waste than valuable. 35% of our requirements change during the project itself. And 60% of the features that we are trying to build into that project are rarely or never used. So what is the point of having that initial requirement? So why are then we saying that the traditional success definition is based on the fixed scope, which is defined early on in the project? How can we predict the values at early point of the project and say, these are the things which are going to be valuable. These are the features which are required and which have to be added in a project, which is supposed to be rolled out maybe 1 year or 2 years down the road. It does not make sense. And that's why this is what was found by the chaos report, that the predictions are lousy. because what we are predicting now is rarely used. 60% of features are rarely or never used. 35% of requirements or the scope of the project change during the duration of the project. So everything is changing, right? Now, let's consider a small example, a very, very practical example that we have in our everyday. So what our requirement of problem is that we need to keep the room temperature at 21 degrees centigrade. We have a heater element in the room, and we can assume that the outside temperature is roughly about 15 degrees centigrade. And we have no thermometer in the room. So what we would probably do is we do a cyclic control. At 8 a.m., the heater element turns on, temperature increases, and probably the temperature goes above 21 to 25 degrees centigrade. So let's mention it out here. We are saying the temperature increases and it goes to 25 degrees C. Please mind my handwriting. And at 8:30 a.m., the cooling turns on and temperature starts decreasing. Remember, we don't have a thermometer in the room, so we are not being able to see what the temperature is. So the heating element or the cooling element have no idea what the temperature is. So temperature starts to decrease, and let's say it goes to 16 degrees centigrade. Now, does that work? Is that the type of temperature control we would like? I would be very comfortable if the temperature went from 16 degrees centigrade to 25 degrees centigrade. Or for example, we just went from 18 to 24 or 25 also. That's not the kind of temperature controls that I'm looking for. So what I try to do is, we still don't have the thermometer, but what I do is, let's try to list all the variables that we need to consider. So let's try to speculate on what are the changes that might happen that could affect the temperature of the room. It's similar to what we do in our project. Remember, in our project, early on, we are doing the design analysis, we are doing the architecture, and we are trying to assume all the variables. So same is the case here. Let's try to assume all the variables. So number of person in the room. So please take 2 minutes and list down on your chat window, what are the different variables that you think would affect temperature and that we can control to ensure that we have a proper control of the temperature in the room. So your 2 minutes starts now. Yep. Windows, how many windows, blinds, how many blinds can we control? So yeah, those are variables that we would have to consider. You're right, Brian. Anyone else? Number of people in the room, outside temperature, exposure to sunlight, absolutely. Size of the room, ceiling fans, windows. See, look at the different variables we are coming up with. Do you think we would still be able to AC capacity? Yes. And do you think even after doing that, we'll have a good control? Just mention on your chat screen. Do you think we still have managed to get a good control there? Yeah, exactly. Because we are trying to predict the variables which we have probably have no control on. And that's exactly what we do in the defined and the waterfall approach. We try predicting variables for a project that is 1 month long, 1 year long, or maybe 2 year long. How can you do that? How do you know that the people who are working on your project leave or not? Or for that matter, how do you know that coronavirus won't affect you? Or coronavirus won't force everybody at home? So there are so many variables in the world. Okay, so let's do something. I mean, so because we decided that this does not work, what we can do is, will it work? No. So let's try to add a thermometer in the room. So we added a thermostat or a thermometer. What that does is, now my heating element or the cooling element inspects the temperature, and once it knows the temperature, it adapts the temperature. So it reduces its cooling or heating based on the temperature of the room. So we are not trying to predict all variables. We don't care about the variables. Number of people in the room, whether there is AC, whether there is windows, blinds or not. We simply try to use a thermostat, and we work with a feedback to try and control the temperature. Will that work? Yes. More than 80% of time that works. Of course, the AC capacity on those things have to be still taken care of, but that will provide a very, very good solution. So basically what we are trying to say is, what we need is an empirical process. The need of the hour is an empirical process, not the traditional or the waterfall approach. Traditional and waterfall approach work when the variables of the project are known. If they are known, good. We can simply apply the traditional approach, which is have the requirements, do the analysis, work out the architecture. Let's sit and code. Once the coding and is done, let's integrate, test, and release. So we follow a sequential process. But in case we are not able to predict all the variables, then we need a feedback loop. And that feedback loop is the loop which is created by the empirical process, which is what it means is that let's collaborate. Let's get a feedback from the stakeholders. Let's get a feedback from the customer. Now, the feedback has to be available now, not 1 year down the line. So that is why we work in slices. We break down work in smaller slices. As Elroy was saying, that is the question I asked him. We break down work in small slices of work, maybe 2 week to 4 week duration, and we try to iterate and create increments which can be shown to the customer so that we can elicit a feedback, and we know that we are working on the right direction. We know that we are going where we want to go and not adding features which are not required. So we don't try doing our requirement analysis at the start. We're not thinking of all the features at the start of the project. We keep adding features as the project progresses, because even the understanding of the customer increases as the project goes ahead. The understanding of the engineers working on the project, that improves. The tools they are working on, they start understanding those tools better. So how can we predict everything upfront? It is not possible. So we need a business model that accommodates change. And that is what is called the empirical process, or the incremental and iterative process. Now, incremental, because at the end of each iteration, we are providing a potentially releasable product increment, which we can demonstrate to the customer, and that increment is added on every iteration. So let's say we're working an iteration in Scrum we call sprint. So sprint 1, we provide an increment, which is something that a customer can see. Sprint 2, we add on to the increment of sprint 1, and add on this increment of sprint 2 to sprint 1 and show the combined increment to the customer. That's why it's an incremental and an iterative model. And every iteration, we keep getting feedback from the customers and the stakeholder. So I think of this whole process as a spiral. So spiral is the circular format is for the feedback loop, and we still keep moving forward. Even though we are iterating, but we are also moving forward we are incrementing. That's why it's called an incremental and an iterative model. So this is what Scrum and Agile is all about. So let's look at what Scrum Guide has to say about Scrum. Now, Scrum Guide is is a guide which was written by two Scrum co-creators, Jeff Sutherland and Ken Schwaber, and it is again available on scrumguides.com. You can download it. It's only a 18-page book, out of which 15 pages are what you need to read. It is only a 1 hour or a 2 hour read, but it is something which gives you the complete Scrum in a nutshell, explains what Scrum is all about. One thing to remember when you're reading your Scrum Guide, each word in that book has a value. Each book has a meaning, has a relevance. So I encourage you to read. So if you guys are interested in Scrum, read that book. It's only 15 pages. Again, 1 hour or 2 hour read, but to understand it would take a little more time, maybe require reading it twice or thrice. I mean, I still read it and I still find something of interesting there. So it's something that will help you. So what does Scrum's guide say about Scrum? Scrum is founded on empirical process control theory, or empiricism. And we just saw that, what empiricism is all about. Empiricism asserts that knowledge comes from experience and making decisions based on what is known. Till we don't make a decision today on what we know now, we will not be able to move forward, because our decisions today is what would create a feedback loop. So if we don't move forward with what we know today, we'll never be able to get a feedback. So, and we know that knowledge comes from experience. As I just mentioned, the knowledge of the customer who's building the product, who wants the product to be built, increases as and when he keeps seeing the increment. When he sees a product in his hand, when he sees products in front of his eyes, he understands what he needs and what he does not need. And his understanding improves. Even the customer, even the engineer who's building the product, his or her knowledge also improves. And they also learn more about the process they're working on, the product they're working on, the technology they're working on. Scrum employs an iterative and an incremental approach to predictability and control the risk. So the predictability and the risk control comes from the fact that we are working in iterations. We are working in sprints. So we are understand what sprint, what feature we want to work on. We can control that. So we can decide, okay, 7th or 8th sprint, and we know exactly when the 7th or 8th sprint is about to come. If each sprint is 3 weeks long, so the 7th sprint is going to be 7 into 3 weeks, 21 weeks down the line. And 21 weeks down the line, what are the features that we are getting? We know that. So end of that sprint, we know we'll be getting a potentially releasable product increment, which would have those X amount of features that we built in. And because it is potentially releasable, the customer, if they want, in discussion with the product owner, can release that increment. That's how Scrum is able to optimize predictability and control risk. So 3 pillars uphold every implementation of the empirical process control. What are those 3 pillars? We already saw those. I'll just reiterate again. Transparency, inspection, and adaptation. Remember these 3 legs? So the thermometer creates the transparency. Once it has created the transparency, the heating element is able to inspect. And once when it inspects and knows the temperature, it adapts the heating or the cooling to the room temperature. So again, 3 pillars that uphold every implementation of empirical process control: transparency, inspection, and adaptation. So what are the different cycles that the Scrum employs for these feedback to get those feedbacks? So these are called the inspect and adapt cycles. So we have the sprint review, which is defined in an Agile. We have the daily Scrum, which happens every day. We do the continuous integration, which is done in hours. So we will be discussing a little bit about it. Then we have the test development. So Scrum encourages continuous integration. We just talked about that. What we are basically doing is we develop a code, we integrate it back to the earlier integrated code. And because we have automated tests which are built in, we are able to test those increments and ensure that nothing is broken in the code. So that's why the feedback cycle is available in ours. Then the developer tests, I just talked about that right now. It's called test-driven development because we are working on test automations. We are building user tests. That is part of Agile testing behavior. So that's not part of this workshop that we are discussing, but TDD, Agile testing, and those are features which are incorporated into Scrum. Scrum is a framework, and you can use various other techniques to improve that. So it's said that Scrum has been left incomplete, and knowingly so that other techniques can be employed within the Scrum framework to be able to get your work done. So most of the Agile teams use continuous integration, use test-driven development. They use pair programming. Now, pair programming is where 2 people are together writing a code. So one of them is writing, one of them is reviewing. So again, an inspect and adapt cycle which is built every second. Developer test is within minutes. Continuous integration is probably within hours. Then daily Scrum, which is the daily stand-up which happens for 15 minutes every day, is where again an inspection and adaptation is built in. Sprint review, which is done at the end of a sprint. So if sprint is 3 weeks long, we are doing a sprint review, and we are again doing an inspection and adaptation. So look at the number of cycles, feedback cycles, which have been built into the Scrum framework. And that is what ensures that nothing goes wrong, because you're getting an inspection done at every stage. We know what is required and we know what would be done. So that's about our empirical versus defined. Now, if we compare 2 methods, we can also compare them to baking and cooking. So baking is something where you have the ingredients, you know the recipe, you know the bake time, you mix everything up, you put it in the oven, close it, set the baking time, let it develop or let it bake, and once it's baked, you get a finished product. You are not able to test in the middle of baking process whether the salt, some of the ingredients are okay or not, if it needs to, you need to add something or not. I mean, it's a simple process thing. The baked product is available at the end of the baking time. While in cooking, which is more of an empirical process, again, every instant you can taste, and according to your taste or requirements, you can add a missing ingredient, or add or remove if you want something. I mean, it's something which has a feedback loop already built in. So in cooking, you get exactly what you desire. In baking, you have to be sure of all your requirements and you have to be certain of what you're trying to get. So if that is okay, then baking is good. If one thing goes wrong, well, your product is down the line. You'll probably have to throw it away. So how can we choose between empirical versus defined? See, both processes have their requirements. Both processes have their advantages and disadvantages. It's not to say that one is evil or one is not, but the approach depends on the problem that we need to solve. So how can we choose whether to plan things before starting or use the empirical approach, which is adapt to what we know? And as I just said, best approach depends on the problem. So think about what we can do is we could probably think in terms of the requirements. So we can then say move from 1 to 10, where 1 is everything known in detail, everyone agrees, no misunderstanding, no unclarities, and it's stable. And on the other end of the scale is unknown requirements or unknown scope. People have different interpretations. It is difficult to get consensus, clarity, unstable, changes frequently required. So different scales. So at the one end, we have everything defined properly. And at the other end, we have things which are uncertain. The scope is uncertain and expected to change over time. Same is the case with technology. That's where the engineers come into picture. At one end, we have the part where we know everything. Technology is known. Everything is ensured. Everything is known, and we are certain that we can do it as per the available resources. And at the other end of the scale, we have where we are in the region of unknown. When things are not known, many things are hanging. Technology is something they started with, and there are so many hidden things in that's still not trying to figure things out. And they have not sure whether they'll be able to go ahead with the same thing down the run or not. But till they start doing it, they have no clarity on that. Other thing that could be the issue is people. Human issues never add complexity if we are at one end of the scale. So it is so easy to work together. Everyone agrees, we quickly understand each other, no politics, everything behaves. And everyone behaves transparently and predictably. And on the other end of scale, we have when people add complexity. Everybody the team is still forming. So I don't know whether you know the Tucker's the team formation, which says that whenever you form a team, they follow four processes of forming, norming, forming, and conforming. So they are trying to form, they are trying to get used to each other. So again, those are all the things that might also affect the project. Go ahead, Parul, you wanted to say something?
No, I was just going to say storming.
Yeah. So it starts with storming and goes to conforming. Yeah. Okay. Thank you. So basically, we need to take care of these three things when we are thinking of which process to use. Another way of doing it is using something called a Stacy matrix. Now, the Stacy matrix basically has technology, which is plotted on the x-axis and the requirement on the y-axis. With at the lower end of the axis, we have where technology is known, the requirement is known, and on the other end of the x-axis, we have technology, which is unknown, and the other end of y-axis, we have the requirements, which are unknown. So when everything is known, and when requirements are known and technology is known, we are in the simple zone. this is the zone where we could probably, employ waterfall technique, because we know the technology, we know the requirements, we simply start with our work, we get the work done, we do the analysis, we do the architecture, we do the product development, integrate, test, and roll out the product. However, when it goes to the complicated section where the technology is unknown, even though requirements are still unknown, at this part, again, we would like to use Agile because technology is changing. We are still trying to get used to technology. The engineers or the developers are still getting used to the technology that has to be used. The other part here, the complicated part where the requirement is unknown, still the same thing, because as we keep adapting to the requirements, the changing requirements, the changing scope of the product, we need to be able to employ Agile. Same is the case when both the technology and the requirement are unknown. When the things are complex, we would like to ensure that we like to work towards an Agile product development. And of course, then we have the chaos section where we would all like to stay away from. So this is just one example of how you can consider using one of the two processes, and Stacy matrix gives you a good way of being able to analyze that. So let's look at a little bit of a definition of Scrum. What is Scrum? As I said, it's a framework within which people can address complex adaptive problems while productively and creatively deliver products of the highest possible value. Scrum is not a process, technique, or a definitive method. Rather, it is a framework within which you can employ various processes and techniques. So this is important to remember. This is what I mentioned. It is a framework within which you can employ your various processes and techniques. Scrum framework consists of Scrum teams, their associated roles, events, artifacts, and rules. Let's look at what that means. So basically, Scrum has three roles: the Scrum Master, the Product Owner, and the team or the development team. And it roughly has 5 meetings. It shows here 5, but if you go to Scrum Guide, they would mention the daily Scrum, the sprint planning, the sprint review, and the retrospective. So in effect, as per Scrum Guide, there are only 4 meetings. But here I've mentioned 5 because I consider the backlog grooming part as another of the meetings there. And it has 5 artifacts. So 5 artifacts. Again, here I've mentioned 5, but the Scrum Guide would mention only 3 artifacts. For artifacts are the documents which are required for keeping the Scrum framework transparent. So according to the Scrum Guide, we have the product backlog, we have the sprint backlog, and we have something called definition of done. Then to monitor, we have the sprint burn down charts and the release burn up charts. Let's look at the framework in its entirety. As we discussed earlier, Scrum framework, it addresses complex adaptive problems while delivering products at the highest possible value. Scrum pillars, we just discussed: transparency, inspection, and adaptation. What are the Scrum values? Scrum values, this is something which is very important. And again, if I consider I consider Scrum values as the heart of the system. So I do help people, organization in their agile transformation journey. So to companies who are organization who are looking at implementing Scrum, what I tell them is, if your team, that is going to implement Scrum is able to even understand the Scrum values and imbibe these values within the culture of the team, you probably got 50% of your agile transformation done. So it's about commitment to the team, courage to be open about the mistakes, being open about to be able to speak up about how they want to work or how they want to develop that part of the work that they've probably picked up themselves. Focus is again very important, because you are probably working in 2-week to 4-week cycles, and you want to ensure that you focus on the sprint goal, and within the 2 to 4 weeks make sure that you are able to deliver what you committed. Openness, again, as part of the courage and openness, that be open about the problems that you're facing. Let the whole team know that the problem that you might face, the impediments that may be stopping you from getting your work done, because the team as whole may be able to help you out. Respect within the team. Each of the members respect each other. They respect their decisions. They respect when whatever the person says, because if you are able to respect, you are able to trust each other. So these are some of the Scrum values. Now, each Scrum project is done in number of sprints, and we've been talking each iteration or a sprint. Now, these iterations are between 2 weeks to 4 weeks long. So each iteration, we probably would be doing the analyze, design, build, test, and deliver. So remember, we don't have a separate sprint for analysis. We don't have a separate sprint for design. We do not have a separate sprint for build. We do each of these exercises, each of these things to deliver an increment within one sprint itself. So within one sprint, on maybe one feature, we would be analyzing, we would be designing, we would build, we would test and deliver in one sprint. So the whole team's focus is to get this part done. The scope of the project is defined in the product backlog. It is also the remaining scope of the product, because as the items keep reducing in the product backlog, the items in the product backlog keep reducing as we pick up these items and place them in the sprint backlog for execution. Sprint backlog is the plan for our sprint. So the sprint backlog is owned by the development team. This is where during the sprint planning meeting, the development team picks up item from the product backlog and then places them in the sprint backlog, and then also places the plan to complete those items within the sprint backlog. Now, sprint is executed multiple times as required within the project until the project is finished. Now, what do you mean by that the project is finished? The project finish could probably mean that all the product backlog items are done, or the customer thinks that the enough value has been created. Remember, we talked every sprint, whatever we are doing, we are creating a potentially releasable product increment. So we are available. So we are basically able to release the product at the end of any sprint. So at the end of any sprint, the customer can say, okay, I think we have enough value added and we can release the product. Now, what do you mean by the value added? Value add is because this product backlog is being prioritized by the product owner. And the development team picks up the higher priority items from the product backlog and adds them to the sprint backlog. So this ordering of the items to achieve the goal is done by the product owner. And at any moment of time, when the customer decides that, okay, I have finished the work, enough value has been added, because most of the high priority items have probably been added. And what is left is the low priority items, which the customer says, okay, I don't think I need them now. I think it's sufficiently done, and I have sufficiently high value product available for me to deliver to the market. So the role of the product owner is to maximize the value of the product backlog. And the product backlog is owned by the product owner, and he is responsible for maximizing the value and prioritizing the items in the product backlog. Now, within the sprint, there are multiple time boxed items which can happen. It starts with the sprint planning meeting, where the sprint backlog is updated. Now, this sprint planning meeting for a 4-week sprint is generally time boxed to 8 hours. And for a smaller sprint, it could be, the time could be less than 8 hours. Then we have the other time box item, which is the daily scrum, which is a 15-minute meeting for collaboration on daily scrum, on the daily basis. And the attendees are the development team. Others may be present, but they do not interrupt the meeting. It's for the development team. It is not a status meeting. It is simply a peer meeting where they discuss what has been done since the last daily scrum to achieve the sprint goal, what needs to be done till the next daily till the next day to achieve the sprint goal, and what are the impediments that are stopping me to achieve the sprint goal. And that is where the role of the Scrum Master comes in, because Scrum Master helps to remove those impediments. The next time box meeting is the sprint review. This is again about 4 hours for a 4-week sprint, and for a shorter sprint, it can be shorter. This is where the demonstration of the product increment is done. And this is again an inspect and adapt meeting where the feedback is received from the stakeholders, from the customers, and from everyone about the product, how the product is progressing. The other time box event is the sprint retrospective, which is for the self-improvement of the team. This is the time of introspection, and basically the team gets together, again 4 hours for a 8 weeks, for a 4-week sprint, and shorter for a shorter sprint. And the team gets together to understand how to plan for improvement in the next sprint. What if they did everything right this sprint? It's a time for introspection. And they pick up at least one item which they can add for improvement, and they add it to the sprint backlog. Also, this is, as I said, time for getting the feedback from the stakeholders, the customers, and the executives. Generally, product owner is the one who's talking to the executive, customers, and the stakeholders. But it is not to say that development team cannot talk to them. Development team can talk to them, but finally, whatever feature needs to be added, whatever story needs to be added, has to be decided by the product owner, added to the product backlog, because the development team works only from the product backlog and they cannot work from anywhere else. And finally, of course, we have the product increment that we've been talking of. At the end of each sprint, we have a potentially reusable product increment. So the different Scrum roles that we talked of: the product owner, who is the owner of the product backlog; the development team, who owns the sprint backlog and does the work required to deliver the product increment in each scrum, in each sprint. And finally, the Scrum Master, who promotes and supports the framework and is the servant leader to the Scrum team. So this is the complete overview of the Scrum framework. The other slide that I have, again, does the same thing. It provides you with the product owner who sets the priority, the Scrum Master, the development team, and the stakeholders are on one end. Then the artifacts are the product backlog, the sprint backlog, and the increment. There are others which I added, but they had no value here in the Scrum guide, sorry. The key meetings are the sprint planning, the daily Scrum, the sprint review, and there is the sprint retrospective. And the development process is all mentioned here. It's the same thing that I mentioned earlier. Just to emphasize the Scrum values that we just went through: courage. Scrum team members have the courage to do the right thing and work on the tough problems. Focus. Everyone focuses on the work of the sprint and the goals of the Scrum team. Commitment. People personally commit to achieving the goals of the Scrum team. Respect. Scrum team members respect each other to be capable, independent people. And openness. Scrum team and its stakeholders agree to be open about all the work and the challenges with performing the work. So these 5 values, as I mentioned, are the heart of Scrum. And if any team can imbibe these 5 values, they've achieved 50% of their agile transformation. Some of the principles that I went through for Scrum: prioritization. Remember, I mentioned that the product backlog. Now, product backlog is the list of requirements that you have for the product. It's the list, it's the scope written in a format which in a user story format. So I won't discuss what the user story format is, because that's again more detail that requires a lot more detailing and lot more description from my end to be able to incorporate in the short workshop. So all suffices to say that all the items within the Scrum and within the product backlog are supposed to be prioritized so that the development team can pick off the high priority items, and by the time the customer decides that he wants to release the product, he has the most valuable product in hand and he's able to get the most out of it. Self-organization. So the team is supposed to be self-organized. Nobody tells the development team how to do their development work in providing a product increment, the potentially releasable product increment. Not even the Scrum Master, not even the product owner. Product owner does the prioritization, but how to get that work done is the work of the development team, and they are self-organized enough to be able to do it themselves. Empiricism, we've discussed what empiricism is, and then emergence. So emergence is that the product backlog emerges because the scope may change. So what we expect is that initially the list is small, but as we go along the product development, that list would become more requirements would be added by the customer as his knowledge of the product also increases. So it's an emerging product backlog. Collaboration is all about the team collaborating with the customers and the stakeholders to be able to get that feedback going. And then, of course, we have the adapt and the inspect cycle. This is what we've been talking of: adapting and inspecting and adapting. And next we look at something called a time box. Each event in Scrum is supposed to be time box, as I just mentioned. So before I go on to this time box part, I just want to know, if you guys are there with me and you would like to add anything there, because I may be going a little fast, but in case I am, please do let me know. I would love some feedback at this stage.
I think it's great info, and the pacing has been nice, so I don't need to change a thing.
Yes, I agree.
I agree. The pace is good, Jasneet.
Okay. Thank you, guys. Thank you very much. So Gaurav has to say, on numerous occasions, I heard that the team members are not happy in Scrum Sprint. They generally get overloaded due to cross-functional expectations and time-bound fast delivery. I think here the courage plays a vital role to speak up front. Is there a sizing capacity we should consider, since you mentioned the scenes time between 3 to 9? Yeah, and you're right there, Gaurav, absolutely. This is where the courage comes in, to be able to stay upfront. But remember, if your team is unhappy with the Scrum and Sprint, they don't need to be, because they are supposed to be self-organizing, and they are the one who's picking up the work from the product backlog into the sprint backlog. So at the end, if they are the ones who are managing their time, why are they unhappy? No. PO or the PM PO only has the authority to basically set the prioritization. He can try pushing the work down the throat of the development team, but the development team is supposed to, again, yes, courage comes in there, and they can push back and say, okay, this is the work we think we can finish, and this is what we are going to finish.
Sometimes what also happens, I've seen, is, there's a lot of push from management to deliver more, more.
So,
right?
It's something that, we've all been trying to work on, because management has to understand what is the agile way of working. It's not, again, traditional way. Traditional way, you can predict, you can try predicting everything, but predictions normally do not work. 65%, and there are so many reports which have been done that the traditional way of working in IT does not work. And yet still, the management still tries to do it, and they still keep failing, and they still don't understand. It's something that they have to be educated also on. They have to understand. They don't have to be agile, but they have to understand what the agile way of working is, and let the teams work in the agile format to be able to deliver a product which has higher quality. There are a lot of factors which we've seen work in agile and which actually help in developing a product which has what everybody wants, what the customer wants. The important thing is what the customer wants. Yes, the team size, Gaurav, is between 3 to 9, excluding the role of the Scrum Master and the product owner. That is if they are not part of the development team. If they are part of the development team, then yes, but otherwise 3 to 9 is the size of the team. So what is a time box? It is the predefined maximum duration. We never extend the duration of the time box just because we need to finish something. We adapt ourselves to finish everything inside the time box. And if it is not possible, we drop the activities that have the least importance. So sprint is a big example of a time box. Sprint, if the sprint is time boxed to 3 weeks, and you've picked up, let's say, 10 items that you want to finish within the 3 weeks, even if end of the sprint, only 7 items get delivered, then even then you do not extend your time box. You drop those 3 items because the 7 items that you've been able to deliver have the highest possible value. They are the prioritized item list, at the top of your list. The bottom 3 are the lower priority items. So they can be dropped. And that's why, again, as I said, we are able to deliver maximum value to the customer because we are working on the prioritized list of activities. Time boxes have a predefined and usually frozen set of items to be completed. We define the items upfront and do not change them. We can refine the items, example user stories, but we do not completely change them. We do not add new items or remove items. So this is still an ideal story, but generally what happens is that items can be added if it feels that, you know, the time, that the number of items that this team picked up is smaller, is of a duration which does not match the duration of the sprint. But one thing has to be kept in mind: whatever items are picked up have to be as per the sprint goal. At the start, when you are start working, when you pick up the items, you also define the sprint goal. So sprint goal has to be adhered to. Even if you're trying to add an item, you have to ensure that it is as per the sprint goal. And again, removal of items is also can be done, but again, to ensure that the sprint goal does not get jeopardized. If the sprint goal changes, then it becomes a major problem. Everything is changing in the agile environment all the time, and we need to stay focused to remain productive. So while everything is changing, we keep these durations, short durations, frozen and focused on development. So because everything is changing and we know we have changing requirements, we have changing technologies, and not only in agile environment, last 50 years has seen so much change in technology. We are overwhelmed with change. The way we used to communicate, in fact, last 1 year, last 6 months, because of this pandemic, I mean, everything is changing. The way we are working is changing. We have new normals coming in. So what these short duration time boxes does is it helps us to focus on that work. So the predefined amount of work that we put on those time boxes help us to ensure that our sanity is maintained and we are able to deliver whatever is happening here. And even if in these short duration we were to change our requirements, I don't think we'll be able to ever cope to the development work. There will be burnouts. There will be situations where the development team will say, some members will say, okay, I'm done. The burnouts happen, the dissatisfaction creeps in. To avoid these things, this is where it is important that during these short durations, we keep the work frozen and focused on development. It creates regularity and discipline, and in particular, helps us create potentially releasable solutions. It helps increase focus, especially when everything is changing and new things are coming up all the time. Now, that's about the time box. Now, I think we've basically covered most of the items that I wanted to cover today, except for one thing. How does Elon Musk manage his schedule using the time blocking method? I hope everyone knows who Elon Musk is. If someone does not, well, you need to get out of your work schedules and start reading a little. Okay, so I'm hoping if everyone does know, I can continue. If someone does not, then I may like to give a short introduction of this guy. Okay, great. Let's move on then. So this billionaire founder of CEO of, go ahead. Okay, did someone have something to say? Okay. So the billionaire founder and CEO of Tesla And Tesla and SpaceX usually spends up to 100 hours a week on both companies. Of course, while plotting to transport humans to Mars and eating his lunch meals within 5 minutes before getting back to work. He also is a family man who spends up to 4 days each week with his 5 children. He also manages to find time for regular exercises 2 times a week, as well as on his personal hobbies. So yes, I know, I mean, he also has an IQ which is beyond us, but yeah, to be able to manage so much is still something that we may be able to learn from. So how does he manage it? So this method is called time blocking, and it has also been used by the other CEOs, including Bill Gates and Cal Newport. From the second Elon Musk lifts off his bedroom pillow at 7 a.m., his day has already been pre-planned in advance. There is no room for random interruptions. There are no blocks of time left unscheduled. Using the time blocking method, Musk intentionally plans his day out in 5-minute increments or time blocks. Each time block is assigned with a specific task or a activity. For example, Musk could use the time blocking method even when responding to overdue emails, eating meals, or timing the work meetings. Even though it sounds very simple, this method sounds very simple, it has its fair share of criticism. One major criticism is that scheduling his time slot in a day becomes too robotic and tedious and misses the purpose of time blocking because the creativity, they say, gets lost. However, the biggest advantage that I see, and this is something which I personally tested out, time blocking forces you to fill up free time with pre-commitments and a plan of action. So basically, you're not trying to procrastinate. In doing so, you avoid the effect of Parkinson's law, which states that the work tends to expand to fill the time allotted for it. It's a very, very simple thing. If I were to work on a presentation, which I probably would take 2 hours, and if I do give 5 hours to the same presentation, I can assure you, I will still finish it in 5 hours. Because then I would like to add things to it which have no value, which have far lower value. I'll be trying to beautify it. I'll be trying to look at some, how to do extra things, which at the end of the day would not matter in the presentation at all. So that's what Parkinson's law say. And Parkinson's law states that work tends to expand to fill the time allotted for it. So try to keep your time blocks reasonable. Don't be too aggressive. Don't be too lenient on them. Try to see what works for you. Another benefit of time blocking is that it reduces the number of choices you'd have to make in any given moment of time. The biggest problem why people procrastinate is when they have to take a decision. So if you create a sense of urgency, you basically reduce the number of choices you have to make, and it boosts your willpower for peak productivity. You take a decision. You're not thinking on multiple things. How to do this? Do I do it this way? Do I do it this way? But because you have to deliver in 2 hours, I don't want to think too much. Let's do it this way. So you're reducing the number of choices that you have, and that creates your productivity. At the end, what matters is getting the work done. How beautiful it is does matter, but what is the maximum value that you generate out of it? The actual work that has been done. That is why this creating the sense of urgency using a time block has its big advantage. So how to actually use the time blocking method? So 3 simple ways. Divide a piece of ruled paper into 2 columns. So just give you an example. So 2 columns. On the left column, allocate every 2 lines to each number, 5-minute or 10-minute blocks of day, whichever you prefer. Estimate. So in my case, if you look at it, normally what I do it in, I think, 10-minute intervals. So 1 hour. So this is 9 p.m., 9 a.m. to 10. This is 10 a.m. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So 10 minutes. Estimate the amount of time each task is going to take to complete, and then write these tasks on the left column with their respective time blocks. Optional, add commentary notes in the corresponding right column. So if I'm saying, okay, this is task 1, which would probably take me 1 hour. So I allotted 6 columns to it, 6 rows to it with what that work is. So example again is from 9 to 10. I wanted to do emails plus follow-ups and stand up with the development team. So this was there as part of my 9 to 10. Then at 11, what I could say is that first I'm doing task 2, task 3, task 4, task 5, and I could list out each of the tasks. So this is a way that I would probably be trying to devote my time using a time blocks. Add buffer times or extra room around each time block to allow for unexpected activities. Ideally, to achieve effective time blocking, you should spend up to 10 minutes previous evening completing your time blocks for the next day. Do not underestimate the time required to complete a task. Bigger tasks, more difficult will it be to use it in time blocking method. So break up your task into smaller time blocks. This is again an example of Scrum and Agile. So break your task into smaller time blocks. Make sure to revise your plan in case of unplanned interruption and keep buffers to allow for creepages. So this was a short example of how a time blocking can be used in your personal and professional life. Now, how does Agile and Scrum help you and the organization? So how that helps is because we say that basically it helps in providing higher productivity. Higher productivity leads to higher quality. Higher quality leads to higher job satisfaction. If me as one of the developers is able to ensure that every sprint I am delivering a product which is of higher quality, my job satisfaction is very high. I feel very happy about it because that's exactly what I wanted. You know, money is one part, but the job satisfaction of being able to be part of something which is high quality and which is being delivered every 15 to 20 days it's amazing. It's a different feeling altogether. To be able to say, okay, 21 days or 3 weeks, okay, we've done this. Next 21 days, we've done this. To that sense of accomplishment, the sense of quality being delivered is so big that the higher job satisfaction automatically comes in. This leads to, of course, the engaged employees with lower turnarounds, with lower turnovers, which of course leads to productivity gains. So this cycle keeps repeating in itself. So productivity gains leads back to higher productivity. And this is what we say is an incremental and an iterative cycle. And as I have been saying, it's like a spiral. We have feedback loops built in, but we are still moving forward. We keep moving forward, but we keep doing the feedback loops. And what this tends to do is it helps us deliver a product with reduced time to market, lower costs, which eventually leads to higher stakeholder satisfaction. So this is all I had for today's workshop. In case you want to know more about Scrum, we have an Agile Scrum Product Owner workshop, which is scheduled for 6th and 7th November. Now, this is in collaboration with IIBA. Then we have the PSM workshop, which is the scrum.org Scrum Master Certification Workshop, 19th to 20th November. We have an Agile Scrum Master, 27th, 28th November, same as, this is something similar to what we're doing for IIBA today. And I think we did it last week, Friday and Saturday. And then we have the Professional Scrum Product Owner, again a scrum.org workshop, which is happening 14th and 15th December. If you need more information, please, you can reach out. You can check it out at scrumadvisors.com /workshops. Alternate, you can also look up my LinkedIn ID, which is basically Jasneet Dua -Agile. If you have question and answers, I am available now. We can discuss anything that you want to discuss. We, I think, have about 15-20 more minutes before you fill out the survey that is showing up in a screen, and then we can move to our question and answer session.